How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at everything we saw in the 15-minute gameplay demo for Hogwarts Legacy. Now, warning, this video won't be for everybody. We're going to really be nitpicking, really diving in and trying to find every single thing we can, intentionally overly critical to hope that maybe the developers see it and they pick up on some of the things that I bring up. And of course, if you guys notice things too, I encourage you, please let me know down in the comment section. But before we get started, let me know what you think of the game so far. I really look forward to hearing your guys' thoughts on it. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Please enjoy. So we first get started introducing, of course, Warner Brothers Games, and next up is the developer Avalanche Studios. They are the developers behind Rage 2, Hunter Call of the Wild, Generation Zero. They're primarily known for making open world games of mixed receptions, and I say that particularly because of Rage 2. It kind of had a mixed release when it did come out critically. But still great games, and it's exactly the type of team that I'm looking forward to tackling an open world Harry Potter game. I think they're a great fit for it, and this could be their breakthrough title. Now, all of this footage is in-game. Of course, some of the camera shots are altered, but this is all in-game footage, and it looks great. Right in the opening shots, as I'm sure most of you probably have pointed out from watching the whole gameplay reveal, if you did, you have these red glowing eyes. This will be a reoccurring thing, this red element around several enemies. This ogre here has it. It's an indication that they've become corrupted by dark magic, and we'll see plenty of examples of this going forward. Dragons, of course, in the game, and we saw the Hufflepuff companion on the side, and then a variety of magical beasts that are available for the players to find and take care of, manage, learn about, which is exactly what we want to see. The opening shot, they did an amazing job of recreating Hogwarts. The school looks absolutely incredible, and there's a lot of great shots that we'll actually see. One of the most impressive things to me here is the scale, and based on what they've been saying, the fact that, yes, you can actually go to all of these areas, some of them probably behind the school that we can't actually see in this shot, but up here you'll be able to explore likely, and just all around. It is noticeably different from what we see in the films. When we see it in the movies, this tower here is the owlry, is connected to the school. That was a director's choice. Here, it's more accurate to what's in the books, where it's actually separated. And then, of course, this large courtyard here does seem to be a little bit different than what we've seen in Hogwarts before as well. But, of course, the grounds have changed. This takes place in the 1800s, so any of these changes, completely fine. And I love the way it looks. In this shot at the bottom, we have the famous wooden bridge where there is, of course, Neville Longbottom in the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Neville and Seamus blow up the bridge as they're getting chased by Snatchers and Death Eaters. Now, interesting about this scene, other than the fact that it's just aesthetically incredible, I was very impressed by the fact that as you see the player character walking here, there's actually no clipping on the robes. The robes react very accordingly to their movements, and you don't see his foot popping through at any point. And that's not an easy thing to do. Fabric and cloth in games is actually pretty challenging, so they did an incredible job here.
You're a new student at the famed school of witch.
Inside the castle, I'm going to talk a lot about the visuals early on, but we're going to move past that as we get. It's going to speed up as we do go, so do keep that in mind. But we do get to see a beautiful art style that stands out to me quite a bit. I like that they're not going for this hyper-realistic style. The lighting looks great, as you can see the light come through the windows here and sort of flood into this gigantic open room. And then, of course, one thing I did want to point out is the fact that it's surprisingly vacant of other students and other characters. Now, this is something that I will be bringing up as we go through the trailer, but I want you to keep your own eye out for it. Some instances, things appear very populated and very lived in, and then other instances such as here, it's pretty barren. And one of my concerns being that you'll walk through these hallways and it will seem a bit empty. They explain it in the initial trailer. They say these hollowed halls, and they will literally be quite hollow in terms of devoid of people. I also like that this character is animated to walk down each step individually.
Hidden in the wizarding world, you'll need to uncover what's behind the return of this forgotten magic and who is seeking to harness it.
Our first shot at the main antagonist of the game, which is a goblin named Ranrock. He's leading a rebellion seeking to harness this ancient magic, and he's fueled by a deep hatred for wizards. We don't know why. Our job as the hero to stop him.
Wizard kind, as you may be the one that decides the fate of the entire.
This area is completely unchanged and very similar to the films, and one thing that you'll notice throughout the game, and something that the developers have talked about in the commentary that took place after the State of Play event, this trailer or this gameplay showcase here, was that they enjoyed really being able to recreate some famous locations from the games and then make entirely new ones so that players can feel the joy of exploring parts that they recognize, but also get the intrigue of exploring new ones. Now, while this courtyard shot does look absolutely beautiful, one thing that I did notice, of course, this scene, just for some context, is where Professor Trelawney is in a argument with Professor Umbridge and is threatened to be kicked out of the school in the Order of the Phoenix, if I remember correctly. One thing I did notice, and again, we're here to nitpick on the finer details in hopes of getting the developers' attention and seeing if they can make improvements, but as the camera starts to pan through this doorway, we do see that the window shaders kick in and sort of break down. Usually it's the exact opposite. Usually it comes into more detail as you progress. In this case, it gets filled in. So not sure what happened there, but something wrong with the shaders. Now, this scene, I have to point out this scene, and I'll put an overlay of the original shot that we had in the first trailer we received. Now, I actually did reboot my channel at one point. Some of you might not know that, and one of my most successful videos was an in-depth trailer analysis of the first Hogwarts Legacy trailer. And when I was looking at that and critiquing that trailer, I noticed that the tables here were incredibly short, like surprisingly short, and people tried to argue with me, justifying that, oh, it's because there's not as many students, this takes place in the 1800s, and I argued back saying, no, you can argue anyway till Sunday, but this is because probably a technical limitation, and what I pointed out was these smaller tables didn't seem very Hogwarts. It ruined some of the magic. It just took away from this grandeur place that Hogwarts is supposed to be, and this is definitively longer. You can see the amount of students that are fitting at this table versus in the old one, and there's significantly more, and it looks so much better. Now, a couple instances that I did spot in this scene, and I want to make sure I point them out. They're very minute, and in fact, you only notice some of them if you take it frame by frame. But you have this student in the front here. As she starts to turn her head, she just boop, sort of snap turns it, and this rigid turning animation is something that occurs a couple times in this scene in particular, but also in a separate part from the trailer. So it seems to be an ongoing problem with some of the animations, specifically with NPCs, because the player character animations do look incredible. Now, you'll see side by side at the same table on this end of it, you actually have two characters, this student right here, this student right here, who are actually in the same animation at the exact same time. When you have this many NPCs on the screen, having that isn't uncommon, and it's completely fine, but you do need to make sure that they're spread out a little bit so it's not noticeable to the players. I will also point out that we're sort of getting this above head view, so when you're actually walking through this, if you were to be, say, this character walking through the scene, you would probably not be able to notice it as easily as things would be blocking your line of sight. But it's still important to make sure that developers notice this, that they can improve it, and hopefully improve the randomization that I'm assuming is occurring here. Now, I did mention that there's actually a couple points where this sort of rigid animation takes place, and you could actually see with, I believe it's this student here, yes, this girl right here who just snaps into place as she is leaning forward. Another thing that I did really like was this girl waving as the professor walks by. It's a nice attention to detail. However, this also made me notice, you'll see this student here and this one here are doing the same animation, slightly delayed from one another. And what I did notice was this one's actually reaching towards some treats that are over here, and as she pulls her hand back, she doesn't actually take away anything, whereas this one is reaching towards nothing and also takes away nothing. So I thought that was interesting. Again, an instance of A, the same animation being played close, but B, this character probably shouldn't be doing that since there's no actual thing for him to grab in front. Then we also have another little snap. If you watch this student right here on the side, she also does her little snap animation, skipping a few frames. This is the most critical I'm going to be in this level, so it just gets easier from here. Another thing I noticed was this singular winged key or dragonfly. I think it's a dragonfly that's just in the middle of the hallway. Interesting. I tried to spend time looking for another one in this room, in this scene, could not find them. So curious why there's exclusively one. Now we do get a look at character customization. They only showcase changing some hairstyles and things like the scars in this shot, but I do want to point out that in the developer blog that came after this went live, they do showcase that you can actually customize your character exactly how you want them to be, although this made me think otherwise. It is nice that you can customize them exactly as you want. It would have been nice if they showed a variety of character faces. Unfortunately, they just stick with the one.
When you arrive at Hogwarts, you will be sorted into one of the 4...
You do have 4 houses that you can be sorted into, although it's not exactly clear at this point in time what the deciding factor is for the house that you get sorted into. Some nice attention to detail is, of course, part of the magic to Hogwarts is the paintings, and you can actually see this portrait back here does move as the player stands up. So there's a couple instances where you do have the famous moving paintings. You could see his hand moving a bit. So you do have the famous moving paintings. There's some suits of armors that jingle and move around. So I'm curious to see how many times you guys can spot that out. Again, this is another instance in that Gryffindor common room where it's a room that we're familiar with, but also when we see a shot later of the Gryffindor common room, it's very different. So they were able to recreate things, make things familiar, and you have this great sense of intrigue and comfort and excitement that comes from things that you recognize. So the developers did a great job. The Ravenclaw common room, the Slytherin common room, here's the Gryffindor common room. Again, looks very different from what we saw in the films. And then the Hufflepuff common room. I love how different and diverse each of these environments look and feel. One of my biggest questions is what factors your house will play into the rest of the game. When you get a look at companions later on, we'll see that you can befriend any companion from any house, which is the way it should be. That makes sense. But how does spending time in the Ravenclaw room differ from spending time in the Hufflepuff room? This is a strong opportunity to make playthroughs feel unique. Each time that you go through one of the different houses, you have access to either unique quests or missions, or even unique ways to complete missions based on the house that you're sorted into, right? These sorts of elements should play a larger factor in the game, and I honestly would be a bit disappointed if it ultimately amounts to nothing. But at least this early point in the game where you're going to classes and hanging out with other students and that sort of thing, I do hope that there's a level of diversity there. Here you have the moving set of armor as it looks to be falling asleep.
So you are the new student.
You do have, I love this board here where we're learning a bit about the classes that you can take, and in this scenario you have some spells that will be familiar, like Petrificus Totalis, which is used against Neville Longbottom in the first film. Rictum Sempra might be a little bit more unfamiliar, not Sectum Sempra, which is Professor Snape's, the Half-Blood Princess spell, but Rictum Sempra is actually a tickling charm. So notice where, however, do notice where this board is with these particular spells in relation to the player characters, right?
Your studies
keep that in mind.
Charms, defense against the dark arts, herbology, and potions classes.
They are talking about particular classes that you are able to take as you go through defense against the dark arts, charms, herbology, as we see here. And we do get to meet quite a few of the professors, right? The herbology professor, each of them seem incredibly quirky. This guy in particular is one of my favorites.
Welcome to year 5 of Charms.
I love his eccentricity. I said remember where those boards are in relation to the players. Now this is a different camera angle, but back in the Charms classroom, now where we have this, right, Lacardum Incantante, as I believe it's pronounced, and here's Rictum Sempra again. It's all the way off to the right of the player versus before where it looked like behind this companion here, this NPC, that the board was right behind her. So this is possibly from 2 different builds when they changed the layout of the classroom. It's also possible that I do understand this is a different camera angle, so that might be playing into it. It also could be an inconsistency, and I'm curious to know which one of those three, it might be, but just something I noticed. That's why it leads me to believe that it's two separate builds.
Confident that we will take hold with the passion and rigor requisite of such a challenge.
Again, animations look great. I love the art style that it's going with. Not this hyper-realistic, but then the animations are great in some places. And I need to emphasize in some places. Here we have another snapping character as he just whomp his way out of the way. But these NPCs in the background are terrifying. Her facial expression completely deadpan. And you'll notice one thing that I spotted, and I noticed this when I watched it live, they do not blink a single time. He blinks. I think he blinked a little bit. You saw his eyes close just a tad as he looks over at his dueling mate, meaning you. But these characters do not blink. They stare. Also, you have this, I don't know if there's a draft in the room, but you do have this weird fluttering of their robes as if a breeze passed through. Maybe he passed gas. I'm not sure. But everything sort of moves as if they're supposed to be turning, but they didn't turn. Also, interestingly enough, the player character's robes, while they did look great in that shot walking up to the school, the way they moved very organically, here you have this weird kind of lump that's sticking out as if they're just a bit too rigid and solid. It's something going on with the physics of these robes. You can see again, they're not blinking at all as this character turns and just gives you the death stare looking at you as you get raised in this platform again. And then this character does another rigid spin.
You may begin.
What I find interesting in this shot, she says you may begin. The player character casts his first spell at his opponent, which this is also a companion that we'll learn more about later. The professor's just looking off in a completely different direction, and she is talking, you see her talking there, but even when she turns her head, it looks like she's kind of looking off over here somewhere. She's not looking at either of the people who are actually dueling. And then, not very good professing there, teacher. And then you do have these students who are in the exact same animation right next to one another.
Not bad for a beginner.
Potions is one of the most challenging and hazardous
Some of the voice
subjects
acting, which I do like the voice acting in the majority of this game, aside from one character, which we'll see later on. But we have the potions professor here, who's noticeable through his distinct lip that he has. I'm curious how that came
Grow
about.
magical plants, brew potions, and more. In between classes,
Once again, beautiful look at the castle. I did actually spend quite some time trying to see if I couldn't find any pop-in or anything of that nature. The only thing I noticed was the way these shadows came into play, but they're so far off in the background, and again, you would not be seeing this if you were walking along the ground. I noticed also that all of the NPCs were kind of congested around this front area, none of them really hanging out over here, none of them on the bridge, none of them in the backdrop here. So it's interesting, this dichotomy of how many NPCs they can fit on the screen. I hope they can get more, because otherwise, again, just bringing up that concern that there won't be a lot. So you do have the juxtaposition in this shot and the next one that we'll go to, with there's a lot of players here. Again, we saw it from a different angle, so there was nobody really on the other side. They were all cluttered here, but there's a lot. This looks vibrant, this looks lively, this looks lived in, and I liked that. But then we get to this next shot, and you actually only see two characters in this entire shot. This one walking here, and another one walking across, one down here as well. So only 3 NPCs in this entire scene, making the castle feel a bit empty. Now, it's worth mentioning that in this shot, they are talking about how there's a lot of secrets to explore through the castle, so perhaps they didn't want the focus on the NPCs that are filling up all the spaces. They wanted you to be looking at the castle. This could be an intentional decision when they were framing this shot, but that remains to be seen. Some nice detail on the portraits as they are moving, and then we do have the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. We could see Gryffindor students here with the red on their robes, and the player in this case has been sorted into Gryffindor. And of course, the fat lady, she's still around. Not quite sure where this dungeon might be, but they are talking within the context of Hogwarts, and this dungeon, I will assume, is underneath the school. Wonder what it's doing here, wonder what the player character is doing here, but there's places to explore. We do get to see a practical use of the Accio spell, which I like that there's both combat uses as well as practical uses in the greater world that you can use. And you can see that you are able to use a spell on certain objects because this is highlighted in a faint white. So it's not just you have to guess where you can cast the spells. It does give you some indication.
That will require magical skill and a clever mind to solve.
They do mention that puzzles take a clever mind to solve and skill. However, we just saw him cast the Accio spell on this portrait and then it seemingly solved the puzzle. So I'm curious as to the level of depth that some of these puzzles might have. Again, I think faintly you can see this portrait moving in the background, which I do love. Pay attention to this NPC here. Did you catch it? Did you see it? Once again, we have an instance of just that sort of sharp, angular turning. Not sure what's going on, again, because the character animations look great. What's going on with some of these NPC reactions. I also love the lighting in this shot, the way it reflects off the stonework. But you do have sort of these shadows that appear in the cracks based on this rough stonework, and I think that's incredibly well done.
Find yourself in iconic locations you've never been able to explore before.
A lot of areas that you haven't explored before. Here we have the kitchens of Hogwarts. And I thought it was interesting for them to showcase, you know, they're saying locations you haven't been before, then they pan to this bathroom. It's probably not the same bathroom that we see in the Goblet of Fire, the prefix bathroom. Of course, there's tons of bathrooms within Hogwarts, so it doesn't have to be that one. But I do like that you have kind of that similar imagery of the mermaid here, which is very reminiscent of that other room. Now, what I find interesting is actually the water here. Not saying the water looks bad, but it does actually look like they kind of just copy-pasted maybe an ocean texture for the water here. You can see these ripples that probably wouldn't be there. There's no water running. There's nobody moving through the water, so this should be probably perfectly still unless there's some kind of underground vents. And it does look to be, you have this darker color. You'd expect maybe something a bit clearer, but you have this darkish color that makes me think ocean water. And then of course these ripples that aren't moving, you could kind of see where these lines are in the water and they're staying completely still throughout the whole shot. Again, this should be perfectly still water. Makes me think that they just repurposed a texture, which there's nothing wrong with that, but in this instance, it did stand out to me.
It's the late 1800s, so while the common rooms and classes may be familiar, most of your professors will not be. However, you may recognize a few faces.
I thought the choice for the voice acting on Nearly Headless Nick was probably one that stood out to me as just a bit strange. He kind of sounds like, almost like what I think a goblin would sound like. I assume that the player is going to the headless hunt or to try to get Nicholas into the headless hunt as he walks by, but you can listen to his voice.
Once Sir Patrick lets me join the headless hunt, I'll be right there with them.
I'm not sure if that's a decision to use that type of voice because he's a ghost. Maybe that's just the way the ghosts sound in this interpretation. But he just sort of sounds like he's graveling a bit. And I'm not too wild about it. And then you have the player bring his own food, which, as we know, when you go to these feasts, there's no food for alive individuals. What I did notice in this shot was the ghost in the background here from this cemetery has sort of, his head is discolored from the rest of his ghostly body. Okay, so I think there's just some discoloration going on with the ghost.
Sure to win them over.
Don't forget why I'm here, sir.
You do have a voice protagonist. It was brought up before, but you can hear him a little bit there, so they'll have male and female voices. And interestingly, some ghosts are teaching classes as well,
while completing side assignments that are part of a special curriculum.
They mentioned that you can complete side assignments that are part of a special curriculum. Now, these we will actually see when we get a view of the menus later on in this gameplay demo, but I do think that a lot of it will pan out to be padding in the game, right? Go here and collect X amount of this thing. Go here and find 3 of these, solve this many puzzles, right? You do have challenges in the game that sort of just flesh it out a little bit. It's the more uninteresting content, and as the player gathers this book out of the air, it appears to me that that's kind of what a lot of this will be. Then you do have some challenges. They say it's designed to help you catch up because you do come into Hogwarts as a 5th-year student, and it's technically your first year, but, you know, we'll have to see how it plays out in-game. In that shot, you have a Ravenclaw student. I apologize as I go back frame by frame to get back to her. You do clearly see the Quidditch pitch, which of course it has to be there, and you have this Ravenclaw student that rides up on the broomstick. Interesting shot to include. Not 100% sure why they chose to do it here. Of course, she is in her Quidditch gear. We don't yet know if you can actually play Quidditch yet. If you can't, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, although I do think that players will be hoping that they can. Just thought this was an interesting shot when they don't mention anything else about Quidditch.
Lumos.
Beautiful level of scale and depth to the dungeons here. And these, they explain, take place in the areas around Hogwarts, where you take the skills that you've learned and apply them to the dangerous areas.
Accomplished and yet enigmatic Professor.
Here we get a closer shot at Professor Fig. He is a teacher, but he's also in opposition with the Ministry of Magic, and we seem to be, this is the carriage that we arrive to Hogwarts at, so he's one of the first characters that we'll probably interact with, and we seem to have some sort of special relation. Perhaps he's the reason why we're getting into Hogwarts, even though it is this late. Professor Fig is in sort of a contest, if you will, challenging the Ministry of Magic as he tries to reveal this concept of a goblin rebellion is true. And then we get to see our first look at the goblin Ranrock here. We saw him earlier in the trailer.
I have opinions different.
It's interesting that they're positioning it in such a way where they're saying that, oh, yes, we have to find out if rumors of the Goblin Rebellion are true. We obviously know that it's true. We've seen the Goblin in other trailer shots. He's talking and he's scheming with some dark wizards, so we know it's true, but it seems like part of the plot of this game, if we had to predict some story details, is it's going to start off with this escalation of, is it true, is it true, is it true? Yes, it's true, here it's happening, now we have to fight it.
As to how great a threat he really is.
As he says, they're not sure how much of a threat he actually is, but you can see that he's incredibly powerful.
Ranrock's loyalists are capable of so much.
They're also, in this immediate shot, they're saying that Ranrock's loyalists are capable of so much more than people expect. Now, we have the player character and a companion looking on from above, but we also have some interesting individuals here. I'm not sure, are they students? Are they dark wizards? This guy looks shorter, so he might be a goblin working for Ranrock. He might even be Ranrock himself. But you do see a character that's walking up on the side here, and this person is going to start walking. I do think that this is, in fact, a goblin, because he does have... These might be goblins, too. They kind of look like they have armor plating, which wizards aren't typically wearing armor. But he has a crossbow in his back, and we'll see some goblins wielding crossbows later on.
Is fraught with dangers.
Here is one such goblin with a crossbow, and we get our first look at the combat. Now, there's a whole section on combat, but I can get a lot of these points out of the way now so that I don't have to repeat myself later. One, we do have these red glowing eyes, meaning they're influenced by dark magic, and I do like that they have a combination of spellcasters, the witch or wizard that's back here, as well as there, versus you have ranged opponents shooting the crossbows, and melee opponents. You'll see him do some kind of magical ability as he rushes towards the player and uses this dark magic on them. There's also a prompt for R1, and I'm assuming that's on an object to use it, because we will actually see that later on in combat scenarios.
Powerful goblins and sinister witches and wizards, all willing to fight.
Lots of stuff that's going to go on here. One, we do have our companion that's fighting alongside us, so they're not just there to kind of talk to and hang out with, they'll actually engage in combat with you. I'm curious to see how their combat abilities differ based on their preferences, and we'll get to meet some of the companions later on. But a couple of the spells that we get, we can go through here, right? You do have this initial spell that's going on, which is Incendio, of course, the fire spell. That one has been used in the films before, and then later on you do actually have him casting what I think is Glacius, which is sort of an ice spell, and that makes sense as he kind of gets frozen to the ground and then boom, exploded in ice shards. And I do like how, one, the amount of particle effects going on in this scene is absolutely incredible. The lighting and the shadow that comes off of the character casting spells, the particles, the fact that they all react to this explosion accordingly. The combat looks great. There are some things that I am nervous about, and we'll see greater examples of that later on, so I'll wait for just a bit. Here we see Ranrock a little bit closer. We also get an example of his voice acting, but also we get to see the Dark Wizard Rookwood, which is probably the main Dark Wizard that will go up against the two of them seemingly, or very clearly working together. And I want to back up just so you can hear their voices without me blabbering over it.
You said you could get to the child when they came to Hogsmeade. That all you needed was a distraction. I gave you a distraction.
I just watched a student take down your distraction.
I love the facial expression that they have. I do really like the voice actors for these characters, and I especially like Rookwood's outfit. Love his outfit.
But perhaps you shouldn't involve yourself with that.
So this scene is taking place. We were obviously eavesdropping on those two characters. One thing I'm very curious to see is how choosing different characters will actually affect story elements. So I'm sure it will affect combat in some way if certain characters have inclination towards different spells, but also how will story beats change? What types of insights will they offer? Will you get different choices? Will they push you to try to tackle things in a different way? Obviously, they have completely different personalities from one another. So if we get to the scene in the game, you know, maybe this character would say, no, we have to stay and fight. But one other one would be like, no, we should leave immediately. And so you get those interesting perspectives based on who you choose to bring with you. And it does seem as though you can only bring with you one at a time, which is totally fair.
Just yet.
Let's go.
As far as I can tell, this location is completely unique to Hogwarts Legacy, but if anybody recognizes it, please let me know. And we do have the character in a completely different outfit than anything that we have seen before. I do really like it, and of course these outfits, as they mentioned later on, do actually affect your abilities and some things that you can do, your skills. Very epically rebuilding the bridge. Now, I'm unsure if this is a cutscene or if this is something that the player can actually control. I can imagine this is a scenario where you just sort of resolve to mashing X or mashing a keyboard button, and I hope not. I hope it's done a bit more engagingly, although if this is a cutscene, that's also totally fine. I wouldn't mind it. It definitely would be more cinematic. Just mashing A, you know, it's kind of not that fun. Or X or the mouse.
Enemies possess unique defensive and offensive.
Love all the variations in the enemies that you have, right? Fighting the beast should feel very different from fighting goblins, which is different from fighting wizards. And I like that there is this level of enemy variety. It would have been very easy for them to just put in a couple types and leave it at that, call it a day, but they took the extra step. Keep in mind, this scene will actually see this combat scenario from a different perspective later on. Do notice this little diamond symbol. Now, in other shots, we can see that this diamond symbol means it's something that the character can interact with. So I'm interested why it's kind of hovering over either one of these two wizards here. And you do have this R1 prompt, as we noticed before. You'll see this a couple times, meaning that during combat, you can lift this object and kind of shoot it towards enemies. I don't know if this is just his outfit or if this is an indication of the player that you're targeting, but he does seem to have this reddish glow around him, making me think that you're targeting this character.
Enchanted weaponry.
Although, probably not, because then he goes off and attacks him. Maybe this symbol means that that's who you're targeting? Not too sure. Because then he goes off and attacks him, right? So there's a lot of things that I'm not fully sure of. Maybe you guys have some different insights and you could help piece it together, but combat looks great. You have the ability to do all different attacks and combos, and we'll see more of that later. One thing I did notice, however, is that enemies really don't behave too smart. So in this case, you have this character who's just sort of sitting back here the whole time. This one's casting a spell. This one doesn't do anything. He's moving into position. He has a clear shot to cast a spell and isn't doing anything. Maybe you could justify, well, this guy's in the way of the one back here. But you see how just they're kind of going one at a time almost. And we'll see some greater examples of this later on, but I am a bit nervous about the AI.
And more. While some may attack directly, others might enchant and incapacitate.
in this shot, you know, different characters, different wizards will have different tactics towards you, which I think is cool if you can kind of spot out, oh, this one will stun me. This one is going to directly attack me, that sort of thing. You do have two wizards here. This one casts the stunning spell at the player. This one is, of course, lifted in the air. And then there's one here who doesn't do anything. He pulls out his wand, and as soon as the player starts to sort of fall, now his wand is raised, ready to cast a spell. And he doesn't do anything at all the whole time. So there's this gigantic window of opportunity for this wizard to cast a spell, and he doesn't do it. Again, make me question how intelligent the AI is. The animations for combat look absolutely incredible, and you do have the ability to parry spells, deflect them while you're shooting, while you're launching objects at all different characters, and using the combination of Accio to pull them towards you, Wingardium Leviosa to lift them up in the air, right? You do have this seemingly basic magic attack that just sort of shoots off these red attacks, and I do think that attack in particular would be really, really cool. This is just personal preference if it did adapt either to your own customization, so you could either make it different colors or give it slightly different effects, or if it changed based on the choices that you make throughout the game, if it changed the way that it looks in its appearance, especially if that is just your basic attack, it would make everything feel a lot more personal. Again, we're back in this courtyard scene, and you see this character walk off screen, right? Pay attention to him in particular. You see him just sort of walk off, and then not a single attack comes off while the player is freely attacking this guy. This gentleman just walked off, and eventually we'll see an attack come from the side, but other than that, he's what, just waiting there? And then we see the attack come off after this guy is seemingly finished and levitated and for the most part incapacitated. So again, the nature of the AI. Some Inferi, I really like the reflections that come, the lighting here as the fire burns on these Inferi. Looks great coming off of the mud, even as the player is casting spells as the spell goes by. Just visually speaking, this game is incredibly, incredibly well done. We do get this epic moment, and this is the player character using some of this ancient magic that he has the ability to tap into. One of my favorite moments in combat from this trailer is he uses Expelliarmus to disarm this statue swordsman, and then boom, flings it right through him, which is epic indeed. The combat, the combos that you can do, looks like it's going to be so much fun, especially in some of these shots where they're just freely attacking, moving between parrying and then grabbing this guy, grabbing that object. It looks incredibly dynamic, so it's a ton of fun, and I can't wait to experience it firsthand. And on top of that, the animations and the particle effects just go to further complement. We had Descendo and the fire spell again. You can use finishers on enemies. It's not exactly clear what indication there was to show that you could use a finisher. You did see that sort of R1 prompt here, so maybe that is the indication that you can finish them off. Of course, when he rolls and then actually uses the attack, you don't see it reappear, but you do have finishing moves that you can use on them, and that one looks a ton of fun. And then you have your mysterious magic, and you could see it through this sort of elemental effect that occurs. He gets smited and just disappears from existence when you call that power, showcasing the sheer amount of raw magic that you're using.
Dozens of spells will let you define your combat style.
Again, it just looks fun, and I look forward to the combination. I think when the combat will really thrive is when you have a combination in one encounter of here's a melee attacker, here's a spellcaster, here's someone that's going to charge you, and when these enemies behave differently and you have to tackle them in these situations, I think it will be a lot more fun than just if you're against a group of spellcasters or if you're up against a group of goblins that are trying to smack you with hammers, that sort of thing. I did notice that when he's using the fire spell again, one, you have kind of this boxed animation of the fire, which is interesting. It's probably intentional, as you see, but then it explodes into sort of this ring effect. Now, we've seen this spell used before and it didn't do this, so this appears to be some kind of upgrade that the player can receive to augment their skills. What I would love to see is some kind of like Mass Effect 1 or Mass Effect 2 style where you actually have upgrade paths and you have to choose one or the other. Do you want it to do this effect or that effect? And they have pros and cons to each, and you could really customize the spells based on what you like that way. And this would be one such upgrade. So maybe you could choose between having a ring or just having an intense amount more damage, or maybe just an explosion around the actual target versus around you, that sort of thing, being able to customize spells. I did notice that the ring fully passes through this goblin here before it actually triggers the explosion effect. But again, you see kind of the ripple from the heat coming off of the fire, all the particles that are going around. And then you do have some destructible environments as this tree gets knocked over in combat. So some minor destructible environments. Again, examples of people just, why is this guy just walking away? I actually didn't notice that before. He's just, there's a battle going on. He's just like, nope. It's sort of, the combat sort of reminds me, I know I'm harping on it a lot, but it sort of reminds me a bit of the Arkham games, specifically Arkham Asylum, where the first one was very linear, where you sort of had enemies just attacking you one at a time, and then it improved in the sequels. It's sort of reminding me a bit of that here, and I wanted to make sure that I drew that comparison, because I think it's very appropriate.
Access to a deep set of upgrades, talents, and skills to aid your progression as a wizard.
So, lots of talents and skills to upgrade as a wizard. What I find interesting, we're going to go through this in order that it's here, right? So you have the top menu that goes to a lot of settings, of course. Quests, so we'll have our own quest log. Owl Post, I'm wondering who you're going to be receiving letters from. Of course, the map, challenges, and collections. I think this will be sort of those padding to the game to keep you playing a little bit longer. Optional, you don't have to do them, but they are there for you. Talents, inventory, and character. These are fairly self-explanatory, and of course we're looking at the talents screen. When he does go through these, you have this one which represented the room of requirement, this one that represented stealth, and this one that represents your core abilities, your overall effectiveness, as it says. These two, I can only guess what they might mean. I honest to goodness have no idea what they could possibly be. One thing I also did notice that I wanted to be sure to point out was that if you count the amount of skills that have been invested so far, 3 out of 8, 2 out of 4, so on, there's actually 15 points that have been invested versus the level 12 character. So I am curious as to how they were able to achieve additional talents. Is it by going to classes? Is it by completing challenges? Where did those additional 3 talent points come into play?
Complete challenges throughout the world to earn experience.
This shot is the only time we see kind of this grayscale nature of this spell, and it goes when he collects this, as the commentary explains, you know, you go and complete and collect things to gain experience, right? So one thing I did notice is when it does take on this grayscale effect, you do have this yellow highlight. This to me, I think, is an NPC that's being highlighted. You can see their legs here, but it's interesting that this one is highlighted behind the fountain, but this one, who's also, his legs are hidden, is not highlighted, and I'm curious why that's the case. Is this just sort of a generic NPC, but this one's somebody you can actually talk to? That's my personal assumption. You also see that yellow as the camera pans around. You get that yellow here and yellow here. So I'm wondering if this is some kind of Assassin's Creed type vision, right? Your eagle vision, as it's called, or maybe it's like detective vision in the Arkham games. Not quite sure what it could be. We haven't seen it been used before, so we'll have to see how it plays out.
Level up your abilities by choosing talents to upgrade your spells, plants.
There is actually a stealth element to this game, which I thought was interesting. Of course, we saw that with the spell, the sneak skill tree. The nature of the stealth, how it actually plays into the game, if it's actually well fleshed out or if it's just sort of gimmicky, is yet to be seen. However, one thing that I'm glad is that it's at least there. Right? I'm glad that they at least included it so you don't have to just go spells blazing to every single situation.
And potions to increase their power. Decide which talents best fit your playstyle to allow you to focus on your favorite types of magic. You can also loot.
So they're mentioning how you can put talents to the things that you want to upgrade your particular skill tree, and we'll actually see a different skill menu, different than the talents we saw before, coming up in a little bit. Here's that diamond again. You know, as he goes to harvest these mushrooms, you know, you can collect them. So that's why I assume that they were collectibles or things that you could just interact with. But then why was it over an enemy's head?
Can be upgraded and specialized.
Not yet sure. So here, instead of talents, we have traits, normal upgrades, and appearance. So traits are something entirely different, and we don't actually get a look at what that is. I want to assume it's sort of perks, but obviously that's just a guess. Also, what do the, you know, this upgrade menu here, what exactly, what upgrades? What are we upgrading? Are you upgrading your clothes? You're making them better? Are you upgrading your wand? Is this where you upgrade your spells? Not 100% sure. Very broad, very general, leaves a lot to assume.
Motion when cutting your ingredients.
You can actually make your own potions, which is cool. Here we go into 3 particular classes that you take throughout the school year. Not sure how gimmicky this might be. This looks a bit like a gimmicky minigame. Not a huge fan of minigames in some of these things. And if all this amounts to is you just have to watch as your character immersively goes through it, that's not necessarily a problem. I'm not against that. Again, it is very immersive, and I'm appreciative that they're trying to accomplish and achieve this level of immersion. But can you add 2 drops of the Horklump juice? Can you add 3? Can you skip adding the Horklump juice to kind of mess up potions or try to make your own things or have potions of varying efficacy? You know, these are the questions I have. When he's stirring and grinding, you see, you know, you have to rotate the joystick to grind things down. Does that just complete automatically when you do it enough? You know, would love to see if you actually have some variation to the way that you do it. Would not like it if you just sort of have to go through the motions. Press X, grind the things, that sort of thing. Here we do have a timer, although I know that people were nervous that does this mean microtransactions? Thankfully, no, they have confirmed that there's no microtransactions whatsoever in Hogwarts Legacy.
You can continue to further your magical education at Hogwarts, progressing your development as a witch or wizard.
I do like that the character is just holding the potion in their hand. Originally, this made me question, you know, does this indicate that if you try to put it away that you'll have to actually drop it to pull something else out? That doesn't seem to be the case. We'll see why in a little bit, but it's cool. It's a nice attention to detail that you drank this potion and then you're actually still holding onto it while casting spells with the other one. We have some magical plants that you could use to your advantage. Here he's holding the plant. You also have some bunny. What the hell happened to that bunny? Oh, that's dirt. That's dirt getting kicked up. Okay. But you do have plants. I like when they make their attacks that actual leaves splurt from it. Again, a great attention to detail. You'll notice at this point, my critical lens, the things that I'm actually talking and critically looking at, is decreasing, is died down quite a bit. And honestly, at this point, I can't see things that I'm really against, that are really worrying me. And the concerns that I've laid are really the biggest ones. The music sounds great. The environments look great. I love this, you know, the differences in elevation. I like the visuals. Everything we've seen from the visuals have been very well done, as I've mentioned multiple times. Hogwarts Legacy is all around shaping up to be an incredible experience.
You can even unleash deadly mandrake seeds.
So here I mentioned, do you just sort of have, you know, the question that I had was, do you carry everything in your inventory sort of just hidden in your robes in typical RPG fashion, where you're always wondering, how are you keeping 7 great swords without even wielding a backpack, right? You do see when he pulls out this mandrake, it just fades and materializes into his hand, and then he pulls it out. Curious how the player character withstands it, because he's not wearing earmuffs either when this mandrake screams. But there you go, a little bit of plot armor for you there. So it does seem as though you'll just sort of be able to store everything in magical pockets in your robes, which it's a Harry Potter game, so you know, screw it. Everything can be justified with magic.
Enemies.
You do get to actually care for your creatures, which is cool. You get to meet them through magical beast classes and care for them.
Grounds.
The goal of today is to remind all of you.
As you fly on your broom, this part was actually particularly disappointing for me. It just, the broom traversal doesn't look very fun. does it. It's very rigid, it's very stiff, the character's not doing any tricks or flips. There's kind of this little boost that they do, but it really doesn't go that fast. You know, when I think about traversal by this type of method, my go-to example is always Spider-Man on the PS4, right? And I understand that's very unique circumstances being a Spider-Man game, but what I will say is it's just genuinely a lot of fun to travel around in. This does not look fun. This looks very rigid, it looks very firm, and just all around not very fun, other than a means to get from point A to point B a little bit faster. I do appreciate that you get this great look at the countryside, some interesting purple runes that I noticed that are kind of glowing out and standing on this mountain over here, but seems like there's tons of points of interest to go off and explore in this open world, which again, when you're playing an open world Harry Potter game, this is exactly what you want to see. Some ruins up here, all down here, some buildings on the coast, right? I'm sure that you could probably go all the way out to here. The only places you wouldn't be able to go is fly your broom, you know, to these islands that are very far away.
Some abilities may be taught to you by students who become your friends.
I thought that was rather interesting that you get certain abilities specifically through the students. In this shot, I looked very hard as the Gryffindor companion and the player character are running towards this gate. I looked very hard specifically at the distant terrain for Poppin. And actually, the only moment is right here, and it's only this little section. So that's incredibly impressive that this distant terrain is done as well as it is. Normally, I'd expect this bush just pops, or this tree just pops into view. These just pop into view. Some of the rocks even might just pop into view, but only these bushes, and it's hardly noticeable. Again, the only reason I spotted it was because taking it frame by frame. So kudos on the distant terrain.
And over time, you'll learn their stories.
We get introduced to 3 companions in this section. The first one is Natsi Oni, I believe it's pronounced, and she is this Gryffindor companion who's headstrong and very just. You have Poppy Sweeting, a Hufflepuff that loves animals more than they love people. And then the last one is going to be a Slytherin named Sebastian, who is fond of breaking the rules. And interestingly, we have Peeves. Peeves is in the books. I don't think he's in the films. I don't remember him appearing in the films. But we do have Peeves, who is a poltergeist renowned for mischief and some chaos. It makes sense that Sebastian, this troublemaker student, would find a friend in Peeves. Then we have this professor taking away. So Sebastian's deal, what we know about him is that he's trying to lift a curse. He has a dark family secret. And this professor is saying, no, you can't lift curses. You can't lift this curse. Stop trying.
Troubling family secret.
Nothing can. The sooner you accept that reality, the better.
You'll meet these students and more as you
They mentioned that you'll meet these students and more. We, of course, there was a flying note that the player probably could have picked up if they wanted to. We have the moving portraits. Again, the inside of the castle looks great. One thing we didn't see was a Ravenclaw companion. I'm not sure if there's only going to be 4 companions in the game, but it might be an instance where less is more, right? Having some that are very well fleshed out versus having a few that are kind of fleshed out. I'd prefer the former. So if there's only the 4 from each of the 4 houses, that's totally fine. If there's more, that'd be great. The Room of Requirement is this interesting little mini-verse, as it is in the films as well, right? But it's almost like a whole separate section in the game, and as it does in the films and in the books, it takes on the role that you need it to. In this case, you can craft different stations to make a potion station. You can see the different, what I think are levels of or different types of stations that you can place in some predetermined areas, which is cool because it allows you to make this custom space. And then you have in the background this menagerie, which will go into more detail. Again, it provides resources to you, potion ingredients that will take some time to craft. Right, we see the 24 minutes. Again, not microtransaction driven. There's no microtransactions in the game.
A helpful house elf named Deke helps you discover vivariums that allow you to nurture your own menagerie of magical beasts.
Yeah, so then you have this game within the game of Hogwarts Legacy, which is building your own menagerie with Deke.
You can freely customize this space to reflect...
And there's a settlement kind of crafting thing that you can customize based on your magical specialties. which is pretty cool. It makes me think that you can very heavily go into kind of performing a certain class. Like this playthrough, I want to be experts in potions and charms, and the next one I want to be an expert in herbology and care of magical creatures. And it can make very different playthroughs when you go through the game each time, and it's sort of reinforced by what they say there, where they mention that you can craft it based on your specialties. Interestingly, you're flying a hippogriff, which looks more fun than flying the broomstick, but a dragon flying towards you. I'm interested to see how that plays out. And then Hogsmeade Station. Again, you only have the one NPC at Hogsmeade Station. You'd expect it to be a little bit more busy, but it's not, and that's a sharp contrast as we walk into this city street that's filled with life and characters. So there's just this juxtaposition that they have in all of these shots. You can go through with your and buy things from Hogsmeade, as well as probably Diagon Alley. We get a look at certain outfits that you can purchase. Some of them really creative, some of them goofier than others, but I do appreciate the variety that's there, right? Sort of look like he was wearing a towel as a cape there. But I do like the variation that you can have.
Emboldened by the turmoil of the times.
And as previously mentioned, they offer different benefits. Now, remember, this is a scene that we saw before. This is from a different camera angle. And I pointed out specifically the last time that this guy on the left sort of wanders off this and doesn't attack from the side. And you could see this whole time as we attack this player, and this guy's just standing here the entire time, does not make a single attack against the player. Little bit questionable AI.
Surrounding Hogwarts is alive with activity. Wonders.
Beautiful shot of the castle. Again, they did an excellent job recreating it. I noticed, and I think many other people noticed it, probably developers as well, that the snow on this character's robes just sort of moves to and fro with no real purpose. You know, it appears and disappears based on the way the robes move. So hopefully they can kind of polish that and fix that up. You do have dynamic seasons, and the seasons will progress as you go through the school year, which I think is really cool because it does follow some of the themes that we have. You know, of course, one of the big themes in the movies and the films and the books is that as the seasons go by, right, the school year progressing. So I'm glad that we actually get to experience that. But not only do we get to experience it, we get to see the diverse landscapes that it creates. So going through these areas, even though we've traveled on some of these roads, on some of these outskirts, you still have opportunities to see them in a different perspective. Now we get into kind of exploring the countryside of Hogwarts, which is a big part of it, going beyond just the castle grounds, which is cool. You could fly through through the dark forest on your broomstick. You could fly through the countryside and explore some of these towns and villages that lie on the outskirts. Again, when we watch this shot play out with the broomstick, it just looks rigid and stale and kind of boring. Not really looking forward to it all that much. I do hope that you can get different broomsticks. It would be a nice little touch to purchase the ones that you want. That would be neat. But what I am curious about is, when does a player character, in between all of his classes, one of the biggest questions that all of this raised for me personally is, how do classes work? Do you have to be there at a certain time? Do you need to be there on certain days? How does time of day work, right? It does appear that it's getting darker out. Is that just based on how you progress through quests? If you progress through a quest, then it will suddenly be nighttime, and now you have the opportunity to go out and explore freely. You know, when are you allowed to explore the castle grounds? When are you allowed to go to Hogsmeade? What times do you have to do this in between your schedule, your normal class schedule? This is a great area where you'll meet some of these NPCs, as they mentioned, that have their own stories, but also where you'll pick up some side quests that you can do, hopefully some interesting stories. They also mention magical puzzles that you can go off and you can explore, and this is exciting. It gives me some Breath of the Wild vibes, which I think is excellent. We have this corruption on these frog creatures here. I don't know the name of them, so if anybody knows exactly what they are, please let me know. So while you have to go off and fight certain enemies, like those corrupted ones, others, if you choose to, it's completely optional, as they mentioned, you can save some of them and sort of, like Newt Scamander, collect them, save them, store them in your menagerie, and then raise them and take care and rehabilitate them almost. You can see these creatures, Threstles? I forget their name, but these are the ones that pull the carriages in Harry Potter when they're marching up to the school. So we can assume that our character, you can only see them if you've seen death. So the player character has seen and processed death in some capacity.
But there are dangers
underneath Gringotts, as you could see with goblins and Fig. And then we get to see, you know, more examples of dungeons, and the commentary is explaining how there's dungeons that you can explore and find, and there's treasures waiting, but also dangers waiting. What I found interesting about this one is, and I'm going to take this frame by frame, as the player kind of casts his spell on this one, these guys just kind of fall and die for for no reason. So I thought that was interesting. Maybe he was sort of the main bad guy, but I don't know how he's any different from these ones. So there you go.
Be careful where you choose to explore, as it may lead you down a darker path.
So we do have the player character casting the Killing Curse. You do have the option to go down darker paths as a witch or wizard, which is very cool indeed, something that I'm looking forward to, and I think could arguably be one of the strongest points in this game. It's not quite clear. They've mentioned how you determine the fate of Hogwarts, you leave your legacy, become a dark wizard, become a good wizard, witch, whatever you want to do, you have these options. They haven't really made clear how that affects the story. How do your companions react to you? How does the school react to you? How do the enemies react to you? You know, of course, they would have to try to navigate this carefully without spoilers, which isn't the easiest thing to do, but I will say, I think it could definitely be, if it's done properly, one of the strongest parts of the game. And again, I can't get over these particle effects. Interesting to me that he's just walking as this room is kind of flooding with this magical gas.
Befriend new allies. Journey across a landscape never
Again, the hippogriff riding looks a lot more exciting than riding the broomsticks, so definitely something I want to do. I found interesting in this shot when this sort of magical effect goes off, he's looking up here even though it's taking place down here, so I'm not sure what Professor Fig is looking at, and your player character seems like he's looking off in just, he's not even looking at he should be looking towards the camera, unless something is actually happening back there that we don't see. He's not looking. Of course, you see him looking up, so maybe something's happening above screen, but then why is the camera panning down away from the thing that he's looking at, right? So just some minor details that I picked up on.
Mystical threats. Learn long-forgotten mysteries. Become the witch or wizard you want to be as you leave your unique mark on the wizarding world.
And then, of course, we get to the end. We see a dragon. At some point, we're going to be fighting a dragon, and that leaves us at the end of Hogwarts Legacy. The music is great, the visuals are great, the game looks great. I'm incredibly excited to see. Other than those few nitpicks that I had, I really can't complain. This game is coming together incredibly well. You can tell oh, that was a great freeze frame. We're gonna leave it there. You can tell the passion that these developers have working on this project. It's so evident, it's so clear. If you guys watched this far, shout out to all of you guys. Thank you. Truly legends among my subscribers, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.